I do solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence I give upon this hearing by the Senate of Texas of impeachment, charges against Warren Kenneth Paxton Jr. Shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God. You may be seated.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Vassar, you and I have met at least once or twice, correct?
Yes, sir.
But I don't think we've talked about this subject. And that is, we have some microphone issues that you and I have to worry about. If you will try to make sure that you're speaking into that microphone to where everybody in the back of the room would hear, and I will try to make sure that I don't talk on top of you, and we go from there, okay?
Yes, sir.
Your full name?
Ryan Vassar.
That's going to work if you can just stay with that. How old a man are you?
I'm 39.
And you married?
I'm married.
How many children?
4 kids.
How old? What ages?
Ages between 3 and 7.
Wow. In 2020, how old were they?
I had a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old, I believe.
How are you employed now?
I'm general counsel for a local nonprofit organization in Austin.
When you left the Attorney General's office, and we'll get to that, how long were you unemployed before you found a place to land?
6 months.
What was your source of income?
Savings, but I was not employed as a lawyer for that 6-month period.
Did your wife work outside the home?
No, sir.
Let's go back now, a little bit of an autobiographical sketch review for about 1.5 minutes if we can. I'm not going to time you, but just roughly. Like where you grew up, your parents, what your background was?
I grew up in Big Spring, Texas, a small town in West Texas. I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. I attended Texas Tech University and majored in accounting. My father and grandfather are both certified public accountants. They both attended Texas Tech. They've had a CPA practice in Big Spring for the past 40 years, where they serve 3 generations of farmers and ranchers and salt of the earth people.
So how many years has your family been living in Big Spring?
My whole life.
All right. Now, when you finished as an accountant at Texas Tech, what did you do?
I moved to Dallas and worked in finance for about a year and decided I wanted to go to law school. And so I started working at Jones Day as a litigation assistant and during my application periods.
Does litigation assistant mean a runner?
Essentially, yes, sir. I was in charge of the documents.
And did you clerk or get to know anybody else of the legal profession while you were there? Other than the lawyers at Jones Day?
No, sir.
All right. Now, and then after you graduated, what year did you graduate from law school?
Law school was December of 2012. I'm sorry, December of 2011.
2011. And Mr. Vassar, were you involved in any outside, either political or social activities in addition to going to college and law school?
I was a member of the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies while in law school. And then I interned for 2 federal judges, one on the Southern District and one on the 5th Circuit.
Which judges did you intern for?
Judge Lynn Hughes on the Southern District, and then Judge Jennifer Elrod on the 5th Circuit.
And those were both law school internships, correct?
Yes, sir.
Were you involved in Republican politics at that time?
Not at the time, no, sir, other than just typical voting.
All right. And then after you finished law school, what did you do?
I served in Governor Perry's office of general counsel as an attorney fellow.
How long did you do that?
It was, I think, 6 weeks. It was a summer.
And then what?
And then I was invited to clerk for Justice Don Willett of the Texas Supreme Court.
So Justice Willett was on the Supreme Court how long, to your knowledge?
How long had Justice Willett been on the court?
Yes.
He might have been appointed by Governor Perry at the time, maybe around 2010 or sooner.
I haven't sought to introduce it, but is it a fair statement that that Justice Willett had a extremely complimentary letter for you to have you go off and seek employment elsewhere when your service was over?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
All right. Now, at the end of the day, how long did you work for Justice Willett?
3 years.
And was that always exclusively on the Supreme Court, or did you work for him after he went to the Fifth Circuit?
Just the Supreme Court.
Now, at the end of those 3 years, what was your internship supposed to be? How long was it supposed to last? Your clerkship, excuse me.
Right. Justice Willett had asked that I commit to 2 years. 2 years came and went, and he said I could stay as long as I wanted to. But just with the circumstances that had changed, when I joined the court to work for Justice Willett, I was single. My wife and I got married while I was working there. And then about a year and a half later, we were pregnant with our first kid. So I think it was just a necessary transition from the court to other opportunities.
Right. So where did you go to work after clerking for Justice Willett?
I joined the Office of the Attorney General.
And who interviewed you? Who hired you?
Amanda Crawford, at the time, was the division chief of the General Counsel Division.
And what year was it that you joined the Texas Attorney General's office?
It was July of 2015.
You recall what your first assignment was in the office?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. And then as time went on, by the time we reached the period of 2019, what was your position?
2019, I was chief of the General Counsel Division.
What does that mean? What would your responsibilities be?
So I advised the agency as the General Counsel, whether it was employment matters or contracting matters, state procurement law, just the typical day-to-day business legal advice.
And then as you went along there, and did you continue to move up within the organization?
Yes.
When was your next promotion?
It was April of 2020.
Now, was Attorney General Paxton already the Attorney General when you joined the office?
Yes, sir.
So your entire career at the Attorney General's office was under the guidance and service of General Paxton?
Yes, sir.
How well did you get to know him?
I might have met him for the first time at an office Christmas holiday party where he and Senator Paxton were taking photographs with employees. That might have been 2 years into my employment, so maybe around 2017. From then until I was promoted to deputy for legal counsel, I might have seen him once or twice at a division chief's meeting, but nothing.
And then what about by the time we approached, let's say, January of 2020? How much contact by that time in your different positions that you had with General Paxton?
He might have contacted me once about a matter, but other than just the typical monthly division chiefs meeting or holiday party, it was nothing substantive.
All right, so we in the jury and the court assume that you yourself did not personally know Mr. Paxton that well at the time.
That's correct.
All right. Were you around him socially other than a periodic office gathering?
No, sir.
All right. Now, when we enter the year of 2020, whom did you have under your supervision in the office?
April of 2020, I was promoted to be the Deputy Attorney General for Legal Counsel.
Does that mean that you were one of the top 8 deputies, or 12 deputies rather, up on the 8th floor?
Yes, sir.
Would you describe, I'm not sure we've broken it down to people, when we talk about the 8th floor, what does that mean in common vernacular for you?
So the 8th floor refers to the 8th floor of the Price Daniel building, where the majority of the executive staff of the Office of the Attorney General have offices.
All right, so when we talk, if the jury is to hear about people where General Paxton dropped into this person's office, this deputy's office, that deputy's office. Were all of these offices along the same area, or what was the physical layout?
So if you can imagine, there's 2 elevator banks in the middle of the building, the middle of the floor. And the offices are spaced out around the perimeter of the inside of the building. So each deputy would have an office. There were roughly 3 or 4 offices on one span or one length of the building. So each deputy would have an office.
So my reason for asking, and I'm asking you the answer to this, is that where the office is readily accessible to each other and to the Attorney General, where any of those folks were within a very short distance on the same floor of dropping in or out on each other.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, when did you first hear, if you ever did, of a person named Nate Paul?
I think it was May of 2020.
And what was the occasion for you to first come? Well, let's back up. What was your position in May of 2020?
I was Deputy Attorney General for Legal Counsel.
Now, how much contact did you have with Mr. Mateer?
We had weekly meetings, one-on-one meetings with Mr. Mateer, Mr. Bangert, and myself.
Now, you're dropping off. I want you to remember that microphone, and maybe you need to move up just a little bit, or... All right. You had these weekly meetings, staff meetings, where there's a day scheduled of the deputies and Mr. Paxton?
So there are deputies meetings that occur weekly, and then there are also one-on-one deputy meetings with Mr. Mateer. So I would meet in all of the deputy meetings, but then I would also meet individually with Mr. Mateer and Mr. Bangert.
And at that time, how old were you?
I would have been 37 or 36 at the time.
And you would have been there at the Attorney General's office since you were about 32 or so?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree that you had moved pretty fast in the organization?
Objection leading.
Sustain.
Sure.
You asked differently.
Yeah. Now, at the end of the day, when you entered into, say, your new position as Deputy General Counsel, what type of matters would that have put you primarily over?
So the Deputy Attorney General for Legal Counsel oversees the opinion writing process, the Open Records Division, the Public Finance Division, the General Counsel Division, and I believe that's it.
All right. So in May, or April or May of 2020, what was the occasion with you becoming familiar with the name of Nate Paul?
There was a pending open records matter involving the Department of Public Safety that had been connected to Nate Paul's name.
Now, at this time, how well did you know Mr. Mateer?
I believe Mr. Mateer joined the office in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd become familiar with him just in my experience over the past 5 years working at the agency.
What was he like as an administrator and first assistant?
He was great. I mean, he was a people person. He wanted to know how staff were doing. He wanted to connect with each person. He was invested in what they were doing, what they were interested in. He would host book clubs where he would select a book, whether it was a managerial book or leadership book, and we'd meet over a brown bag lunch and just talk about a chapter of the book and how we could implement it in our work and at home. So he was a role model.
Was he religious?
Yes, sir.
How about you?
I am.
In what way?
Objection relevance, Your Honor.
It's very relevant to who these people are and in light of who they've been
Overruled.
accused of. Thank you.
My wife and I attend an independent Baptist church here in Austin. We've been members at different churches here in Austin, and I've been a member throughout my life.
What did you view your duty as an assistant AG to be?
Assistant AG, or as far as Deputy Attorney General for Legal Counsel, I was responsible for providing legal advice to the agency through the various functions of the divisions, whether that was the Open Records Division, the Opinions Division, the Public Finance Division or the General Counsel Division.
You've heard, have you not, or have you heard, you're being referred to by the Attorney General, all of you, as rogue employees?
Yes, sir.
What was your reaction when you heard that allegation?
It was hurtful.
Why? Tell me.
Sorry. I worked for the state for 8 years as a public servant, as one who values.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Thank you. As one who values the commitment to public service, to set an example for my kids, the people that I worked with, the people that I managed, and it's contrary, the statement of being rogue is contrary to the years that I dedicated my life to the state.
How did you become familiar with Nate Paul?
Well, as I mentioned, the first time that I had heard the name was connected to the open records request that was pending at the agency, the Office of the Attorney General, involving the Department of Public Safety.
And did you learn what the issue was about this open records request?
Yes, I did.
And what was the issue?
The Department of Public Safety had received a request for public information. Under the Public Information Act, agencies that desired to withhold information for a valid purpose have to ask for the Attorney General's ruling on withholding information within 10 days. The Department of Public Safety had requested a ruling from the Attorney General's office on whether it could withhold information under the law enforcement exception to disclosure. So in other words, if there is information in the request that qualifies as law enforcement information that is not required to be disclosed, the agency is requesting the Office of the Attorney General to make that determination so that that information can be withheld.
At the time that you began to have awareness of Nate Paul, how would you describe your sense of loyalty and support of the Attorney General?
It was my understanding that General Paxton had met personally with Nate Paul. He considered what had happened to Nate Paul to be wrong, and he wanted us to find a way to help Nate Paul.
And when was the first time? Did you have conversations with the Attorney General about this matter?
Yes.
When did personal conversations with the Attorney General begin in person? Either, well, let me put it, in person or by phone, or by text, any of that way. When did you first have contact of some type with the Attorney General about Nate Paul?
It was in the month of May of 2020.
And what form did that take, and how did it happen?
I believe it was all in person. There were no phone calls or text messages or emails, to my knowledge.
All right. And when they had these phone calls, do you recall what the Attorney General said in the first one and what the occasion was for that call?
The initial call was a request to pull the file, basically.
By whom? Who asked you?
General Paxton.
Do you recall what he said on the call?
Well, I say it wasn't a call. It was generally in person.
Oh.
So stopped by the office, asked me, I would like to see this file. And so I contacted Justin Gordon, who is the chief of the Open Records Division, and asked him to bring the file to my office.
Now, at that time, had you had any contact with Nate Paul's case yet, or was the General Paxton's request of you the first time you had become involved?
That was the first time that I was involved in the DPS file, the request at that time.
So, did you get the file?
Yes, I did.
What did you do with it?
I reviewed it and notified the Attorney General that I was prepared to meet to discuss it.
How did you do that? How did you notify him?
Normally, it would have been an email to his scheduler, just to see if he was going to be in the office, to see if we could schedule a time to meet. I don't recall specifically if I emailed the scheduler or contacted his aide.
All right. Did you, when you reviewed it, what all did you do? I mean, how much time did you spend reviewing this file?
It's my recollection, everything was drafted. The initial draft of the ruling was already complete, and it was a standard law enforcement exception was raised, law enforcement exception applies, the information should not be disclosed. So it was a pretty straightforward review.
Did you learn one way or the other whether there had been a previous ruling and finding from the department as to whether or not the law exception applied to the same event that was now happening with DPS?
Mr. President, I believe the objection would be this question calls for the solicitation of hearsay.
I don't agree it's leading, but I'll withdraw it because I don't think it was understandable. So I'll take it back.
For all the questions.
Thank you very much. So let me ask you this. When you reviewed the file, did you find out anything about whether or not, what event was being complained of that they wanted access, whose files they wanted access to?
The subject of the event was the August 2019 raid of Nate Paul's home and businesses.
All right. When you reviewed the file, did you find out one way or the other whether this issue had come before the agency once before about the file on the same event?
At the time, I did not connect this event to any previous determination by the office, but subsequently, I did connect the two.
All right. So ultimately, did you discover or connect, as this was the second time around for Mr. Paul and his attorneys seeking information to overcome the law enforcement exception?
That's right.
Objection leading.
All right. Now,
Sustained.
all right. Now let me ask you this. After you reviewed the file and you informed the Attorney General you were available to meet, was there a meeting?
Yes.
And can you put a time area for us as to when this meeting occurred?
It was in the middle of May, and the reason that I believe that it was between that period is because when the Office of the Attorney General receives an open records request for a ruling, the office has 55 days, up to 55 days to issue that ruling. The DPS ruling was due June 2nd. That was the 55th day. So we would have been discussing it in the middle of May before it was released on June 2nd.
Now, you made a minute. Was there already a draft opinion regarding the matter that was intended to be issued before July 1?
Yes.
Or was it June 1 or July 1? I've got...
June 2nd was the 55-day deadline.
And what was the preliminary opinion that already existed in the file when you started looking at it?
It was to withhold the information under the law enforcement exception.
Now, when you told the lieutenant, the Attorney General that you were available, how soon did you meet with him if you did?
It would have been a matter of days between notifying him and scheduling a meeting in his office.
You met with him in his office?
Yes.
All right. Was anybody else present in the meeting?
There were a series of meetings at which Justin Gordon, the chief of the Open Records Division, and Ryan Bangert attended.
All right. So at this first meeting, were they both present?
I don't recall if both were present, but there were just in this meeting and the subsequent meeting, they were both in attendance at one or the other.
What did the Attorney General say in this meeting?
He asked us to review the file. He asked us what what our interpretation of the file was. He told us that he had spoken personally with Mr. Paul. He said that he believed that something bad had happened to Mr. Paul. He felt that Mr. Paul was being railroaded by the FBI and by DPS. And General Paxton said that he didn't trust law enforcement. He asked us to find a way to release the information that had been requested to be withheld.
Now, in your experience and your familiarity with the subject, what was your response to that?
Objection, hearsay?
It's not. This is the witness. This is his
Overruled.
response. Thank you.
I told General Paxton that if we were to reach the opposite conclusion and to require the Department of Public Safety to release the information, it would upset decades of precedent involving the law enforcement privilege, where law enforcement agencies rely on the protection that the Public Information Act gives it to protect ongoing information, to protect confidential information, to protect witnesses who could be compromised if their names or their identities were released. So there's incalculable problems with reversing the decision to withhold the information and require it to be produced, not just across the state, but with the Office of the Attorney General.
Mr. President, if I may, a lot of this is in narrative and not responsive to the question.
That is exactly responsive. I object to this.
Just state the objection, but sustain. Go ahead.
Thank you. What was your opinion, based on your experience, is the potential danger to innocent citizens who had cooperated with the police, thinking that would be confidential?
It could silence people who might ordinarily comply or speak to the police if suddenly their names or identities could be released.
So what was the Attorney General's reaction when you told him all? But first of all, the stuff that you just said, is that essentially, in a sense, the information you gave him in explaining what your position was?
Yes, sir.
Did anybody else speak up as well?
Objection, hearsay.
I asked if anybody else spoke up. That is not
Overruled.
thank you. Did anybody else speak up?
Ryan Bangert also spoke. I don't recall exactly what he said, other than that.
And what was the Attorney General's reaction to all this?
He, again, insisted that what had happened to Mr. Paul was wrong and that he didn't trust law enforcement.
And did he make any distinction about which agencies, or did he talk about all law enforcement?
It was specifically the FBI and the Department of Public Safety.
And did he say why he didn't trust them?
He said that he compared what had happened to Nate Paul to General Paxton's own personal situation involving the Department of Public Safety and the State Securities Board and the FBI.
Well, were you aware of who provided his security?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
The Department of Public Safety.
Did he indicate in his comments what his level of feeling or trust or distrust about them was?
Not to me.
All right. Now, how long did when you expressed what his initial opinions were, did he go any further, or how did the conversation proceed?
He asked me if he could obtain a copy of the DPS file.
Had you ever been asked or know of any other time where the Attorney General had asked to see a particular file that it's a public information request for?
No, sir.
So what did you do?
I said that it was possible for him to receive a copy of the file.
And I believe you said this was around May 15th, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Did you provide him the file?
Yes, I did.
Did it have everything in it?
Yes, sir.
Did you take anything out of it?
No, sir.
Can you tell us whether or not in that file you had, there was any brief from the FBI weighing in as to their materials in the file and their position as to whether it ought to be released?
Yes, the FBI had submitted a brief in response to the DPS request.
What was the process or procedure within your department if you have a request for open records, people want to get some portion of it from another agency? What was your policy as to let the other agency weigh in?
The Public Information Act requires state agencies to notify the third party whose information may be at stake that they have a right to submit a letter ruling or a letter brief to the Office of the Attorney General for consideration.
So in these circumstances, would it be normal or unusual for y'all to have notified the FBI there was this request, that the request was to an agency whose files included FBI materials? Would it have been usual or unusual for them to let them know so that they could respond if they wanted to?
So in this situation involving the DPS request, the Department of Public Safety did notify the FBI that its information may be at stake in this request for a ruling. And the FBI responded by submitting a letter brief to the Office of the Attorney General under the ordinary principles of the statute.
Were you aware through these materials and looking through the file that there was an ongoing federal investigation of Mr. Paul at that time?
Yes, it was clear.
Did you take a position with the Attorney General that there was an ongoing, at least federal, I'm not including right now state because I have no knowledge one way or the other, but that there was at least a federal ongoing investigation of Mr. Paul that release of these documents would interfere with?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Did you inform him one way or the other about, did you have discussions with him concerning the topic of an ongoing federal investigation?
Yes.
And what did you tell him and what was said?
It's my recollection that there were discussions about the substance of the brief that the FBI had submitted, the quality of the arguments that they had raised and made.
And did this brief provide details of the ongoing federal investigation?
Objection, that will solicit hearsay, Your Honor.
No, I'm not asking for communication. I'm just asking whether or not it contained details about it.
May I be heard on that?
Yes.
Mr. President, so Mr. Hardin is asking the witness about the contents of some other document that is not currently in evidence, pretty much right down the fairway of hearsay.
I'm not asking for
I'm going to sustain, rephrase your question.
Well, I'm not asking you for specifics of what it said. I am only saying, were there documents and information in this file that were used as the basis of a conversation with the Attorney General concerning the presence of an ongoing federal investigation of Mr. Paul?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, when you gave the file to him, how did that happen? Did you go to his office? What did you do?
I believe I delivered the file to Andrew Wicker, who was General Paxton's aide at the time.
And did you later confirm that Mr. Wicker gave it to the Attorney General?
Yes.
And how long was it? Will be some intervening events I'll ask you about. Well, how long was it after that event that you retrieved your file from the Attorney General?
Well, as I mentioned, when the Office of the Attorney General has to make a ruling, it's on the clock. So we have a timeline. I was notified by Justin Gordon, the chief of the Open Records Division, that we needed to make a decision because the clock was coming up. It was approximately 7 to 10 days before that when I delivered the file to Andrew Wicker, and Mr. Gordon had emailed me asking for a status update.
And so then how long after, back to the original question, was it from the time you gave it to the Attorney General to you? Let me ask you this, was it ultimately returned to you?
Yes, it was returned to me.
And when was it returned? Approximately when was it returned to you?
I believe it was May 28th or May 29th.
All right. And in the meantime, were you part of any later conversations after the one you just relayed, in which you expressed your opinion, the Attorney General expressed his? Well, let me back up. In that second meeting, counting the first meeting being him asking you to look at the file, okay? The second meeting would be the one we just discussed. In that second meeting, did the Attorney General give you any indication as to what he wanted you to do?
Well, he wanted us to find a way to release the information.
And after you expressed yourself, Mr. Bangert expressed himself, the Attorney General expressed himself, in that second meeting, was there a conclusion as to what was going to happen?
No, sir, not that I recall.
All right, how did the meeting end up?
We were essentially at an impasse on our recommendation not to release the information and the Attorney General's decision to release it in some form. We told the Attorney General that we would review our options and follow up with him to see if there's anything else we can look at.
What was his position as to whether or not he wanted or thought the law enforcement exception should apply?
He didn't necessarily take a position that I recall other than something happened to Mr. Paul, it was wrong, this shouldn't be allowed for the FBI and the DPS to get away with.
All right. Now, after that, when was the next time you had any contact with the Attorney General on this matter?
Again, it probably was a matter of days after that, just in line of the timeline and the deadline. We followed up and let General Paxton know that we looked at it again. We didn't think that we could reach an alternative conclusion.
And who was the we in that part?
Ryan Bangert and myself.
And how did you let the Attorney General know?
We met in his office.
And do you recall when this third meeting was?
I believe it was toward the end of May.
And
Counselor, not to interrupt, we're a little past our mid-afternoon break. Is this a good spot, or do you want to go?
This is
You're
fine
here?
Sure.
Okay. We'll stand in recess until 3:30.